Hello everyone and welcome to today's Smart Winter Adtech virtual event. This panel is being hosted by Samsung Ads in our lovely Winter Lodge. My name is Emma-Louise and I am the European Programmatic Sales Lead here at Samsung Ads. So it's evident that CTV has had a really great year, and that's thanks to COVID, to be honest, and is set to become the future of video advertising. So looking more closely at programmatic CTV, which we know is still somewhat in its infancy, it is growing rapidly, with scale being driven by programmatic adoption and audiences making the jump from traditional TV to digital streaming services. So with this growth, there are naturally challenges along the way, from understanding what CTV actually means, how to buy CTV programmatically, and the use of data for CTV buying. But all of these present a huge opportunity for CTV and maximising the benefits this medium can bring to advertisers. So I'm joined today by our two lovely speakers, and I'll have each of them give a brief intro of who they are, what their role is, and where they work. So Austin, I don't know if you would like to start the intro.
Hi, thanks Emma-Louise. Good to see you. I'm Austin Scott, head of video market development for Xandr across Europe, based in London. And I focus on making sure that the kind of from top to bottom, the strategy, the relationships, the partnerships are kind of aligned for success, supporting our market leads in Southern, Northern, and Central Europe.
Excellent. Romain, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. So nice to meet you, everyone. Happy to be here in this nice and cozy cottage. So I'm Romain Job, covering for strategy execution at Smart. And so one of my area of focus is this big development that we drive on the CTV and advanced TV space.
Perfect. Well, thank you both for joining me. So I guess we can kick off the panel with a question to you guys. So how do you see CTV fitting into the programmatic ecosystem?
For us at Xandr, I think that TV and CTV is kind of the future. You know, it's where most of the kind of high impact eyeballs have really been spent over time. And as we see audiences and, you know, consumers make decisions on viewing in more internet enabled ways, that's where we can take the best and the greatest learnings from programmatic around automation, targeting, you know, and apply things that we also know are incredibly important, which is getting closer to the media owner, the source of the supply, and really understanding, you know, what custom creatives can actually be matched with really compelling content and what targeting is going to drive that success for everyone.
Yeah, I do agree with what Austin mentioned. Like it's both a future and a transition that is happening. So basically, what we noticed in the last few months and years is that CTV is benefiting from the infrastructure built in the programmatic ecosystem. When you look a few years back, CTV was only traded through IOs. But today, the video programmatic ecosystem allowed the transition to RTB. And so like a lot of our effort, for instance, is around driving, let's say, programmatic direct transaction for the CTV space, especially programmatic guaranteed and so on. So overall, like the ability to deliver a personalized message on a TV screen within the living room experience, with affordable campaign budget is something that is very appealing to brand, and it explains this huge growth at the moment. But still, there are many challenges to tackle for the future from an ad tech point of view. And I think a lot of that is linked to the fragmentation of this ecosystem and how to funnel all the relevant data points to the buyers. So it's an exciting challenge.
Yeah, I'd have to agree, and I think from my perspective at Samsung, you know, it's CTV we're seeing huge growth and a lot more people talking about it, but there is a tendency, and as you mentioned, the challenge is that it's a different medium to what you would see as your standard digital inventory. And I think that's kind of where some of these challenges are coming from, is that it is a different form of advertising, but it is being bought in a very digital way, and how it differs from other video formats that you can buy online. And actually, Austin, I have a question for you, because you've spent much of your recent career kind of focused on video advertising. How do you see CTV sit alongside those other video formats? And do you think that that really sets them apart?
Yeah, I think the CTV is a bit set apart for sure. You know, the power of, you know, on-demand viewing and being able to select longer episodic kind of content is probably, you know, for my own behavioral experience, what I'm doing. Most people I know that are looking for more casual viewing are not going always to SVOD, but, you know, if it's like watching Friends for like the 700th time, you know, maybe. So I think that that's kind of like, when you look at the digital formats, I tend to think about it in terms of like, you know, there are these personal devices, and that's where I think of online video or digital video on your desktop or on your mobile. But whenever I think about TV, I'm a little bit device agnostic. I'm thinking about the type of content and the mode and the mindset of the viewer. You know, if you're kind of just looking for relaxing, lean back, hypnotic, general watching, or, you know, deep, detailed story, thrillers, that could happen on any device in my mind. But I think what I keep in mind and what I, you know, talk to brands and agencies about is that it's what you define as, you know, the high touch experience. But I think CTV is definitely making its waves and really bringing something new to what you can do with digital video, because it's really still TV in my mind.
100%. And Romain, do you think that programmatic buyers know how to buy CTV today? Because from what we've seen is like there's a natural kind of inclination for buyers to just treat it just like any other video format. However, it is quite different, and we often see that it's not treated differently. So advertisers tend to not get the results that they were hoping for, that they probably would have got with online video, and give up pretty quickly. So what do you think are the most common mistakes or misunderstandings that you see on your platform?
Yeah, I mean, like to your point before, like CTV needs to emerge as a programmatic ecosystem of its own. And today it's not yet the case. So there are clear differences between digital programmatic and the CTV space, like from data access to measurement or just campaign execution. And in some ways, I think part of the challenge is also that, yeah, too often on the buy side, there is some sort of confusion between the TV teams and the digital teams. And basically, again, it didn't emerge as a channel of its own. A very common mistake that we see is around measurement. And so, for instance, the viewability KPI, buyers from the digital, they expect a third-party vendor measurement for each and every campaign they will deliver on a CTV channel. And it's not available at scale today. So there are new standards that are emerging, but they are not adopted. And so it shows pretty much how CTV campaigns need to be executed differently than what buyers know from the video space. Another specificity is the importance of deal ID, programmatic direct based execution in the programmatic space. Like it's really the most important execution. And I think another topic that is very important is that, yeah, we have to remind that we are on a TV screen. And too often, I would say that the constraint around the legal and tech compliance for media creative are forgotten on the buy side. And so same here, I think standards need to emerge, be adopted. And so, yeah, it explains in some ways why there are still some big pure player on the buy side for CTV, that there are so many managed service offering as well, just to help agencies and buyers execute those campaigns. So a lot of room for education and expertise growth.
100%. And Austin, I suppose from your perspective at Xandr, are you seeing like the similar things as the guys at Smart Ads are as well?
Absolutely. The idea of where do the budgets sit when you're considering CTV versus digital buys is very much kind of case by case. And I think that there's not a an overwhelming trend yet. I would say that the mindset I've seen in Europe is much more progressive when it comes to how do you really kind of approach it, tackle it. Many teams might kind of already have close collaboration between AV and digital, even if there's not full synergy. I know a lot of people still do like back of the napkin math to get to a cost per point on what they have bought in digital. So there's that willingness and the openness there. And I think I've seen huge leaps in education and across the board. I think everybody has kind of a shared common interest in getting this hurdle sort of crossed, because it does seem to be where everything is heading. And the point about standards is completely necessary. There have to be a lot of ways to make something that's already a lot of fragmentation, already a lot of kind of, you know, home built, homegrown technologies that run television, you know, being able to work with partners like yourself that kind of have a leg up on how they'll be able to kind of access viewers and what they'll be able to do with them is pretty impressive. So I think that's kind of, there's a real positivity, and the education seems to be in the right direction. I don't think anybody thought it would go as fast as it has. And, you know, some people contribute that to the pandemic, but I do also think that consumers like this sort of on-demand world.
And I think that brings us on quite nicely to kind of talking about like data and how that is and always kind of will be king. But what changes have you both seen this year in, you know, how video advertisers are using that data? Would you say that the data really matters, or would you say that sources of data are effective and what can be trusted?
I don't find trust to be too much the focus. I guess I think of it as right now we're building the momentum of scale. So there's not mass market reach necessarily. You know, there may be a lot of homes that support internet enabled television, but maybe a lot of the viewing practices are still on subscription based services or television, VOD, televod. So I think there's probably still some progress to be made there. So to me, the data, when you're working directly with the publisher, very sound. If you're doing a match in a bunker, very sound. I think there's not a ton of third-party vendors that I hear from agency buyers that they're necessarily requiring on their buys. There are some that work with measurement companies directly. And so we definitely support that when they're used. But for me, my kind of view on targeting to a degree is like context can still really provide a lot besides publisher, you know, login data that can be extremely valuable. I think that when you're sort of, I remember one of the fun hangups of programmatic display and stuff would be you talk to a partner and they're like, my campaign's not delivering. And I'll be like, all right, so how many cookies are in your user pool? And they're like, 200,000. And it's like, well, there are over 360 million people. So it might be lower delivery, you know? So it's kind of, when we're dealing with smaller scale, I think it takes, you know, you got to take the targeting in perspective when you're dealing with smaller audiences.
Definitely. And Romain, what about you?
I mean, yeah, I think the starting point is that indeed there is a scarcity of third-party data in this space, especially in Europe. Like we don't see the plethoric offer available in digital mirroring into the CTV space. This being said, with all the restriction around privacy and such, like it's very unlikely that third-party data will play a major role in the future of CTV. On the other hand, first-party data are very valuable. We see more and more OTT, CTV players willing to expose those large-scale first-party data on our platform, and it's really what I think will bring value to the campaign targeting and optimization in the future. This being said, a major trend at the moment on the CTV space is that there is a growing appetite for content data. So probably linked to the scarcity and the fragmentation of the audience data, probably based on the traditional planning in TV and such. We know how to leverage content for campaign model for audience modeling, campaign targeting, optimization. And so it's playing a growing role in the ecosystem.
And I think that brings us nicely onto, you know, the topic of brand safety, because I think brand safety is one of those things that it follows programmatic wherever it goes and whatever medium it appears in, and it continues to obviously it's a major concern for big brands, and it gets even more so when we're looking at it programmatically. So arguably, like contextual targeting around premium curated TV content, it gives or I would say that it gives advertisers an added sense of control. But would you agree with that? Do you think that contextual advertising is still effective then?
Absolutely. So I think the brand safety is a must-have. It's not up for debate anymore. I think there's that extra layer of brand safety where, say, some food companies don't want to be next to any alcohol, you know, even if it's just a picture of it on the page. I mean, there are some layers to that. But that basic level of brand safety, working directly with publishers, we also have kind of an interesting way we've seen it leveraged where we can adjust the content taxonomy from the ad server or the CMS of the media owner and offer that up on bid requests. So there are some interesting ways to try to do some standardization around what do you call entertainment, what do you call thriller, and be able to kind of offer that in a more standardized fashion to let the buyers have some additional targeting insight, reporting insight, because I know a lot of buyers want ideally show level, but that is definitely at a premium. So being able to offer genre-based or content-based standardization is going to be something I think will really help. We can combine that with the power of deals and then, you know, really have a compelling kind of like always on sort of subscription bundle in real time.
That's really interesting. And you think for that kind of thing, it needs to become almost like an industry standard of these kind of genres to be able to then allow buyers to be able to buy that at scale, because ultimately that's with programmatic, you know, naturally it's that question around scale and volume, which is why programmatic took off on display in the first place and allowed buyers that flexibility to buy then across multiple media owners at whatever cost that they were needing to make, right?
And the thing I forgot to mention too is that when you're talking about video, you're now going into a whole nother realm of content. So audience rating on age, you know, type of, you know, sensitivity about topics discussed. You know, I think that's something we forget in display and other formats, that it's like, oh yeah, we have to actually worry about kind of the content itself being not just topic type, but you know, the themes presented and the maturity of the audience, and you know, whether it's going to be long format, short format, you know, live. Like I think there are a lot of different elements, you know, in the TV, in the long format content space that just don't get considered normally when trying to think about context.
Definitely. And Romain, do you agree with that? Do you think that rings true for you too?
Yeah, I mean, so it's a challenge. I mean, like overall, like CTV is still, even if it's big already, like in its infancy. So there are a good amount of risk for the brands, aside from pure context, just fraud is a topic or copyright issue and so on. So there are risks for brand exposure. To be honest, like we'd love to be able to provide full automated brand safety. It doesn't exist at that level because it requires some data processing that is not available today on the market. The way we approach that is first by like just pure curation. I mentioned already that this inventory is mostly traded through PMP, deal IDs, and I think it speaks to that. It's really like mandatory to limit the exposure of the buyers. So it's really one important area of focus, like first making sure that you access the right inventory through the right path as well. So there are standards in digital that can be leveraged here for CTV. And when it comes to the context, there are indeed a need for standardization around the categorization and so on to address some requirement of the TV advertising. but still a long way ahead. So context targeting, yes, but a lot of work still.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you talk around, you know, the PMP versus programmatic guaranteed and that kind of that exchange there, because I think when at my old role over at The Guardian, I was working on the display team, and you know we were pushing the programmatic as much as possible, and for online video, you know, we saw strangely with standard display inventory, you know, PMPs really took off and that was what people were buying through. But when it came to online video, it was pretty much all programmatic guaranteed, and that was what buyers were really focused on, because they knew that video inventory was very scarce. The quality of the inventory wasn't as premium in terms of scalability that they wanted, so they knew they had to get in that reservation as soon as possible. Do you think that we're going to see that same rise of programmatic guaranteed with CTV buying as well? Do you think that that's what buyers are going to start favoring pretty quickly, considering that the scale is there?
It's what we see already, to be honest. Like it's a major part of the spend of the transaction, and indeed it's driving the space in some ways. So it has to do with the fact that supply is scarce, data is scarce, and indeed you have this need of control on the buyer side.
And more fuel for that is that you may have a media owner that has 300 deals, PMPs, and 30 of them being PG, and then the revenue that those 30 drive of the total share is quite impressive. So I think that it's not just some of the conceptual elements about it, but you really just start to see that revenue, the security, the element of, like you're saying, like really trying to lock down some premium access is kind of what it's always been about in terms of quality. And I just want to say, TV gets this rap as being solely a branding medium, but I think it's one of the strongest drivers of action. It just has been harder to do a one-to-one match on those actions. But I think when you see like how much search will spike after, a TV ad spot, I think it's next to impossible to not think of CTV as really opening the doors to the perspective that CTV is performance as well.
That's a really interesting point. And do you think that the buyers are kind of are making those connections, or is that something that we in Adtech and media need to start pushing a little bit more in terms of, looking at the overall picture? And, as we were talking about earlier, where does CTV fit into the programmatic ecosystem? And actually it's being able to pick out data points like that and show the proof that actually CTV does drive more than just that branding, like you say.
I mean, the brands see it in the sales for sure. And a lot of brands have really sophisticated, abilities to kind of track outcomes. There's definitely a layer for kind of brands that need additional services and, maybe agencies that don't take on that responsibility themselves. I think the big wins for finding out how to really make that work, it's still in its infancy, because the key, I think, that TV taught everyone is to do reach and frequency. Maybe gate some of your media, do reach and frequency, kind of A/B test and see what works. And you'll see how many diapers go off shelves. And I think that's kind of where, when you have huge amounts of supply and some walled garden experiences, you don't get that solid view on reach and frequency to totally accurately check, but you can do as best you can. Like there's still ways to get to the response rates and outcome-based measurement.
I think that brings us on nicely to my next question for you both. So what do you think is the number one challenge that CTV needs to address in order to become more ingrained into that programmatic mix?
I think my maybe biased view right now is it feels like as scale starts to ramp up on supply, it gets to that element of, how do we do discovery better? How do we do packaging better? How do we make sure that, relationships are frictionless between buyers and sellers? How do we help with, in taxonomy and ratings ingestion to make sure that the information is as automated and seamless as possible? So maybe it isn't as simple as just one answer, but I do think that probably the focus here now is, how do we take that education piece and that foundation that's been laid and really take it into now more that focus on discovery and matching up campaign to supply in that thoughtful way, not just in an automated fashion. Algorithms are great, but there's still a great potential for just humans to do some of the work that makes the next phase a success.
Yeah, I guess you could argue that, whilst it's still in its infancy, this is a really great time to test and learn and understand how the inventory operates and how that has an effect on your campaign metrics, right? Because it's when it takes off that you don't want to be the brand that's left behind because you haven't spent that time investing in those areas, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And Romain, what about you? What's your number one challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I will double down on what I mentioned before. Like, I think it has to become an open programmatic space of its own. I mean, we mentioned the standards at every level of this supply chain many times already. And I think like there is also a risk in this ecosystem because there are some large digital players who are, playing a strong role already, who have a very big position on the contact distribution level, on the data and consumer relationship level. And so there is a risk finally that they take over this space. And so I think, all of us in some ways, we have to organize ourselves to maintain the right level of openness and transparency, and make sure like platform vendors, content owners, and brands can collaborate.
And so we're just coming up to time, so I'll leave you with one last question for you both. So what are your 5-year predictions for CTV?
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, 5 years is wow. No. If I want to take a bold one, like like the transition from linear to digital TV and CTV in particular will happen much faster than thought. I mean, there is no doubt that the content consumption has shifted already, and the pandemic has, for the greater good, shown to be a great accelerator. Advertising support, streaming offering are booming, and it's a major trend this year, like now. And also what we saw in Samsung in the first place, but like the CTV and OTT players have really invested massively in their advertising infrastructure. And so all of that, for me, again, it's a bold prediction, but I would say that by 2025, CTV advertising will be on par with the traditional TV. Not saying that it will be bigger, but really comparable in volume.
Brilliant. Austin, what about you?
I think that his gut is right. I do think CTV is going to only continue to exceed expectations and how it plays a role in our lives, as well as in the marketers' plans and drivers of results. I would like to kind of throw out, I guess, something more about the power of TV. And it's like if linear viewing has been changing, what hasn't really been changing is like the linear narrative. And I think that there's a lot of, I've been wondering, well, how do you also like get more ad space? Because a lot of traditional ad considerations in television is, there's a certain amount of commercial break patterns and, thresholds that consumers will put up with. So every 30 minutes, they'll watch a little bit of ads. So I think if there's more of an entertainment revolution as well, like I want to kind of start seeing more excitement there, because when I just do like a basic thing, like for sure, like programmatic and technology will figure out how to make the best of what we got. Now, what happens if the content starts to evolve? You can do dynamic ad placement in content. You can do facial recognition and ambient feedback on how the story evolves, and then what brands might be better suited to be placed because the choose your own adventure style content has now changed. That kind of stuff is maybe not 5 years, it might be more like 10, But I think that that's really like, that's where I see the ability for real-time data to feed in. You also kind of need maybe some more real-time content signifiers to help, improve that impact of right time, right place, right context, right meaning. That kind of stuff I think is very exciting, just because you want the brand and the ad experience to evolve too. And I think as brands get that opportunity either to become publishers more themselves, to integrate more into the content in a different way than maybe they used to do with just product placement, have that be more real time. Yeah, that's kind of what I think would be really cool to see.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a really interesting prediction to kind of look at into the future of just how quickly it can evolve. Because I think you're right, like TV is fairly consistent with its ad breaks, and we know that from like display, you can have a surge in an article which floods the ecosystem with the volume of impressions. And as a publisher, you can add new placements and add new formats to your rotation, so you can be a lot more flexible. And I think, yeah, it's having CTV kind of adopt that flexibility as well as the market starts to change, and that we become the ones to push and evolve, that will be really interesting for sure.
Yeah.
Well, brilliant. So we'll actually need to wrap up there because we are coming to time. But thank you both so much for joining me today to talk about programmatic CTV. I think this is definitely a conversation that's going to be continued in the market as we start to see that growth in programmatic television, especially as we move into 2021. So yes, thank you both so much for joining, and I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you
Very
for
much.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's go for a hot cocoa now.
I would love it.
Yes, indeed. I need that.
Okay. See you.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.